Hey, it's Silver, and this is Depersonalization. This game is, well, it's honestly kind of hard to describe in a lot of ways, but seeing as it's my job, I'll try my best. Depersonalization is basically what you would get if you combined a tabletop role-playing game a la something like Call of Cthulhu or Arkham Horror with a JRPG, and it was written in a similar way to like the Limbus Company's games, stuff like Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina, a little bit of that strange madness to it. And the whole thing is just really, really interesting. Honestly, this is the kind of game that I made this channel to spotlight in the first place. Back when I first started, what I originally wanted to do was bring attention to a lot of really unique and odd indie games that people just weren't talking about enough, and this fits that bill perfectly. So the way it works is that you'll choose a scenario to start with, and the scenarios in this game are basically like adventure modules from something like Call of Cthulhu. They are a set of self-contained quests and goals and characters and environments and all that stuff all wrapped up in one package. And once you choose a scenario, you will be placed into that scenario, get some intro story to what's going on, and then you and your investigator character that you created will have to go off and actually find out what's actually going on and how you can solve it. Now, the very first scenario that you'll have unlocked in the game is sort of like the game's tutorial, but it's quite extended, and this scenario will actually have a set character that you have to play. But after that, you unlock more scenarios, and with those you actually create a character, and in fact, it's actually a good idea for a multitude of reasons to have several characters created at once, and this game's character creation is really, really in-depth and mirrors a sort of pen and paper or tabletop role-playing sort of environment. You don't have a lot of visual customization, but you have a lot of other customization. You'll be able to choose all of their stats, all of their skills for skill rolls in increments of 10, as well as their starting class, which determines like equipment and other bonuses they get, and a whole bunch of different traits, which are passive effects, both positive and negative, some actually having multiple effects depending on what time of day it is, and these are where a lot of the really interesting aspects of the game take place, because one of the biggest inspirations this game takes from tabletop RPGs is the fact that you cannot make a character that's good at everything, and that's okay. You know, the idea isn't to eventually get a character that's just super great and can pass every skill check no matter what, because that kind of goes against the point of the whole game. You're supposed to fail some checks because this game has a lot of different failure states, and more often than not, just failing a check doesn't end the game and force you to reload. Instead, it evolves the scenario and takes it on a different path than it otherwise would have, and in fact, there are some skill checks that actually advance the story if you fail them. So when you're making your various investigators to take on different scenarios, what you're actually trying to do is not to make a jack-of-all-trades, sort of moderately good at everything kind of character that defeats the entire purpose of the adventure. The point is to make someone who's really niche and is very good at certain things but not very good at other things. So instead of splashing some points into everything to be sort of moderate at everything, which will honestly just cause you to lose a bunch of skill checks probably, what you'll want to do is make a very specialized character that is super good at something but has a lot of flaws, and the trait system makes this very apparent, and in fact there are several slots of traits that you have to fill where some of them are just like character flaws that prevent you from doing certain things. Like for instance, there's one slot you can fill that is an actual personality flaw that causes certain actions and dialogue choices to be unavailable to you. Like for instance, one of them is careful, and if you're careful, any sort of action that would cause you to do something knowingly dangerous or just risky behavior, they'll be locked out and you can't choose them because you chose a careful character. So there are a bunch of different choices like this that will lock you out of certain things, and the cool thing about those choices is that if you want, you can actually burn 10 of your sanity in order to unlock those choices and take them anyway, basically going against your character's nature on purpose to see what happens. And once you are in a scenario, you will be presented with an environment to explore, and there's a lot of exploration and gathering and observation and clue solving and stuff in this game, just like something like Arkham Horror or Call of Cthulhu that it was very clearly inspired by. There is combat in the game, but it is not a main feature. It's not a focus of the game. The combat system is actually pretty fun, in my opinion, but it is also not something that you're going to be doing tons and tons, although there are, of course, some modules that have more combat in them than others, which is why you can choose characters like police and stuff like that that have more of a combat-focused skill set. As you're exploring around the world and talking to people and questioning them and finding clues and all that stuff, you'll come across a ton of skill checks. And at first, the skill check system might be a little bit confusing as to how it works because it's a little bit unorthodox, but it's actually pretty simple. Basically, a skill check is done against your skill in that particular area, and a lower roll is better, not higher. And also, the 2 dice that you roll are treated as one number, not as an added sum. So basically, if you have, say, a perception skill of 80 and you do a perception check, you have to roll under an 80 in order to succeed. succeed at it. The lower the better. And if you roll, say, a 5 and a 3, that doesn't mean that you rolled an 8 total, that means you rolled a 53. And that total will, of course, affect whether you pass or fail. There are also certain skill checks that treat a failure as a success for certain reasons, and there are even some that are very difficult to pass because they require something like a critical success in order to actually be treated as passing at all. Although this is usually very late in a module before you'll find skill checks like that, but they do exist. And there are loads and loads of skills in this game that can be checked, from perception and observation to shoot and throw and sports, which is basically just like athletics, medicine and mysticism and some other various things like that. So there are just a load of different builds that you can make for your characters and a lot of different ways to play them, which is definitely the game's biggest strength. Where the game really shines is in how similar to a tabletop role-playing adventure it actually is, and how detailed its mechanics are, to the point of feeling a lot like playing one of those. This gives the game a really unique air to it that you don't see very often. And that also goes with its overall world, because this world is very Lovecraftian. It's very much like a cosmic horror sort of universe, but it also pulls from a lot of other sources. So you'll see a lot of Lovecraftian entities and stuff, but you'll also see a lot of anime stuff. You'll see a good amount of stuff from like extended universe Lovecraft things, you know, like the King in Yellow and Carcosa. You'll also see some other like more popular internet pop culture sort of horror. Like there's even a direct reference to the SCP wiki in this game, and there's a specific article, in fact, that it points to that actually exists. So this game pulls from a whole lot of different sources to create its sort of horror tapestry, and the tapestry that it ends up making from it is very unique and very unsettling in a lot of ways. This whole world sort of feels like there's something unspeakably wrong with it, but in a way that you can't quite pinpoint immediately, so you have to do these investigations to figure out what's actually going on. And honestly, by the end of it, you might not even understand exactly what happened in its entirety unless you did all the side stuff too. There are loads and loads of side quests that you'll run into. You have a book of clues that you can check at any time, and every time you get a clue, you'll get some more luck, as well as an update to that clue in your book to tell you what to do next. And there are just tons and tons of them. Some side quests will actually help you out with the main scenario quest, because they'll give you some sort of benefit or a better understanding of what to expect, or maybe even an actual item to equip or something like that. It depends on the quest. And the luck that you get is not a stat, but is actually a consumable item that's kept in your inventory, because you can actually burn luck, usually about 5 luck, in order to re-roll an unfavorable dice roll. Although some results cannot be re-rolled, it depends on the skill check, but most of the time you can actually choose to re-roll them for burning some luck. And actually completing a lot of other optional objectives and side quests and stuff is sort of doubly useful, because not only do they often give you a benefit in that individual scenario itself, but also once you successfully complete a scenario and get its sort of true ending, you're sent back to the hub area where you can make new characters and choose new scenarios and stuff. And in this hub area, you have a currency, space-time points, like these little crystal thingies. And you get more of these points the more of a scenario that you uncover, the more alternate endings you find, the more side quests you do. All that stuff adds up at the end once you finally complete it to give you more of these points to spend. And you can spend these points within scenarios to, say, reload a save or restart a battle if you die. You can also spend them in the hub area to unlock new stuff, or to do things like taking special artifact equipment with you, because you can actually find artifact equipment within certain areas of scenarios. And unlike other equipment, which is cashed in for points when you complete a scenario, the special artifact legendary stuff actually stays with you and goes to the library hub area with you, and you can choose to take it out on your next adventure and spend some of these points in order to make your investigators start with some of those items to give them an edge. And each adventure has quite a lot of variety to them. They're all really different from each other, with an entirely different sort of scenario of events, different characters, of course, as well as just different hazards to overcome. Because you are sort of a being outside of time, the character that you start playing as is the character that you also play as in the hub area in between missions. And this means you can actually go to several different time periods, so that the scenarios don't all take place in the modern day. Some of them take place in ancient times, some of them take place in a sort of contemporary modern day, and some of them are sort of in the middle. And this is one really good reason why you might want to have multiple different investigators rolled up to use, because some people are going to be more fit for different kinds of scenarios than others, depending on the types of skill checks and hazards that you're expected to overcome. Combat is a pretty interesting beast in this game when it happens. It is very lethal. Combat doesn't tend to last very long. Yeah, your investigators have very low health, and the enemies don't often have very much health either. Even the bosses don't actually have that much. So combat is a pretty fast affair. You can attack with your bare hands if you want to. You can also attack with any weapons that you might be wielding in your main or offhands, although if the weapon has durability, this will consume some of its charges, or ammo if it's a ranged weapon like a gun. All of the combat is based on dice rolls and your stats, so you do have to be careful about doing things like preparing for an attack. You can choose to sort of spend a turn to prepare for an attack, and then the next round you'll have a much larger bonus to your chance to hit and stuff like that, and maybe even your damage rolls. You can also cast spells, and this game uses the sort of Arkham Horror / Call of Cthulhu influence with its spells as well, because spells in this game are extremely powerful and tend to have very powerful effects, but you can't cast them very much and they're quite dangerous because they spend mana, which it recharges very slowly, so you don't have a lot of it most of the time, and they also spend some of your sanity to cast, so you can't spam them or anything, but they are very strong and are often more specialized to be really useful against certain types of enemies and things of that nature. You've also got all of your various skills, and this is another point where the game excels in its tabletop-like mechanics. You can check a whole bunch of your character's skills in battle. So things like medicine and observation and sports and things like that, they all have an actual battle usage. And you can just go into your skills menu in a battle and see the various percentages of using those skills on an enemy to see what will happen. So for instance, you could roll against your observation to try and learn some secrets about the enemy to understand its weaknesses and attacks better and stuff, or you could roll one of your other stats for other various effects. This is a really cool idea because it gives all of your skills even more relevance than just for skill checks while exploring or while in conversation. It also gives you skill checks in combat, and you can choose to do them anytime you want to, which is a really cool idea. And it's the sort of thing that other games, like say Baldur's Gate 3, have started doing in terms of giving you more of like a tabletop or pen and paper experience by allowing you to do these more open-ended actions depending on the kind of character that you're playing. And I really appreciate stuff like that because in video game form it tends to make for a very just a varied combat system that's really interesting, and that's definitely the case here. Now, I mentioned some sanity mechanics earlier. In this game you have spirit points, or SP, and these are basically sanity. In fact, whenever you see something really disturbing or otherworldly, you actually have to make an SP roll to check against your stats to see how much SP you'll lose after witnessing such a strange event. And SP is an extremely important resource on this game, as tends to be the case for any sanity mechanic in any like cosmic horror universe. Particularly high sanity can give you some very powerful buffs, and very low sanity can give you some exceptionally malevolent debuffs that are very bad for you. And in fact, there's one really bad consequence. If you completely run out of sanity and still manage to finish a scenario while you're out of sanity, you'll actually have that investigator permanently deleted. They will die forever. And although you can still roll up any number of investigators that you want, this can still be a problem because in between missions you can actually choose to spend some time and points on investing in your various investigators' skills and stats to improve them. So they don't just exist as singular characters that you create and then take on missions. You can also keep them as like a roster of steadily improving characters over time that get better at what they do. I really personally like this mechanic because, again, it feels like a tabletop game where generally if your character fully died, they were gone and you had to roll up a new one. But in this case, it just makes you more invested in each character that you're making, and it makes you actually want to keep them around and make you feel like you have some real consequences for extreme failure. One thing I do have to mention, though, something that you've probably noticed in the background just by reading some of the text, the translation, the English translation of this game is not great. It is, it's fine enough, like it's utilitarian, it does its job. I've never been confused on what to do or had something that was presented in such a way that I didn't understand, but it's just very stiff and literal, as tends to be the case for a lot of more amateur translations. And honestly, I never blame a developer for not having the money to do a full professional localization as a small team, because they are very, very expensive. And to be fair, if you're dealing with a cosmic horror universe, a lot of the concepts you're talking about are already kind of difficult to explain and describe anyway, because that's just the nature of that style of horror. So it's always going to be a little bit tricky to translate some of those ideas across in English, and I understand that in a case like this, where we're talking about a much smaller company, they probably don't have the money to have this much text and dialogue fully translated in a professional way. This might be one of those cases where if the game gets popular enough, they might be able to actually afford to have a more professional translation done, or if it exists for long enough, they might have some fans willing to actually do a fan translation for them as well. That sort of thing tends to happen with certain more obscure games like this, so it wouldn't surprise me if something like that comes along. But I do have to mention the fact that because of the game's translation, you do have to fight against some of the dialogue a little bit, although in my opinion it is absolutely worth fighting against in translation to experience a game like this because it is just that unique and interesting. Depersonalization has just so many unique mechanics in it and so many neat ideas that, yes, it is absolutely worth subjecting yourself to an imperfect translation just to play through it, because it is actually that good. It's that fun, it's that neat a take on the cosmic horror story sort of idea with some really awesome tabletop-inspired mechanics that all come together in a very unsettling and deeply strange world to create some very memorable adventures. So, as always, I will of course be linking you in the description below this video to the Steam store page of this game if you wish to check it out for yourself. It's only like $20, which is kind of ridiculous to me because it has a lot more content than that might sound already. Even though it is in early access, all of the currently available content feels finished and fleshed out. It's clear that what the early access is planning to add is more stuff, not polish on the already existing stuff, because it already feels quite polished, aside from its currently and hopefully temporarily stiff translation. So thank you guys very much for watching. Do please check out games like this to support these small developers that make them with such passion and interesting ideas. And I'll see you guys next time.